Hey guys, so today Carlsen and Caruana played their last classical game in the World Championship match. So Caruana with the white pieces in this game, he is definitely going to try for a win because Carlsen is the heavy favorite in the tiebreaks. So Caruana opens with e4 and Magnus plays the Sicilian. So we again have the Sveshnikov Sicilian here where Carlsen plays after knight c3 the move e5. Knight d to b5, d6, so all this has been played before in the match, knight d5. And here in the previous games Carlsen went back knight to b8, but here he played knight to e7. So c4 was played by Caruana, so here there are some well-known tricks. So don't go g6 here because then queen to a4 and then this is threatened, knight c7, knight d6. So g6 would be a big mistake. So here the typical idea for black is to play the knight to f5 or to g6. So here Carlsen went knight to g6. Queen to a4 played by Caruana, so threatening this. So bishop to d7 was played by Carlsen. We have queen to b4 from Caruana. So stepping out of the pin, also now threatening the pawn on d6. So bishop f5, opening up a defense from the queen. h4 from Caruana. So here black could play this bishop e7. If h5, knight f4, bishop takes. E takes f4. So black is willing to trade the knight for the bishop, because even though this messes up his pawn structure, but now he has the two bishops and his king is relatively safe. Black is simply going to castle. But after bishop e7, here white can play bishop to g5. So if a6, then here take, and then black must take with the king to defend the d6 pawn. Otherwise he would have to go, after bishop g5, he would have to go f6. So I'm guessing Magnus didn't like this, so here he played the move h5, which is a novelty. So previously the move a6 has been played. So h5 stopping white from continuing on with h5. So we have queen to a4 from Caruana, threatening knight to c7 check. So here bishop back to d7, queen b4, bishop f5. So Caruana could repeat moves queen to a4, but well, he doesn't really want to go into tiebreaks because Magnus is the heavy favorite. So here he plays bishop to e3. He could also go bishop g5, provoking black to play f6. Because if black tries something like queen to d7, then here comes queen to a5, looking at this pawn on a7, but also threatening knight c7 check. And if b6, then here queen to a4. So now a6 doesn't do much because black cannot take on b5 because then the rook would hang. And now white is threatening to play knight to c7. So here black pretty much has to play f6 in order to play the move king to f7 to get out of this knight c7 check. So here white should be pretty happy with the position. Okay, but after bishop f5, Caruana decides to go bishop to e3. So immediately threatening here, bishop takes. So Carlsen plays a6, knight back to c3, queen c7. And here Caruana had a very long think before playing the move g3, about 25 minutes. And Carlsen immediately played bishop to e7. So throughout this match, throughout this game, Carlsen was very prepared. At some point, he even had like an extra 40 minutes on the clock compared to Caruana. So here, after the move bishop to e7, white could just play bishop g2. And after castles, b3, white himself is ready to castle, b3 to protect the pawn on c4 from ideas like rook to c8. So white is going to castle. Here, black could try and play bishop d3 to stop white from castling, but that doesn't accomplish much. Simply rook to d1. And this position is actually okay for white. But after bishop to e7, Caruana plays the move f3. So he is hinting that he is not going to go kingside. This move stops black from having ideas like playing e4 with the knight coming in on e5, maybe even to d3. Also, Caruana could try and blockade with knight to e4 at some point. But where does the king go exactly in this position? Here, castling queenside immediately looks pretty scary with this bishop looking down on b1. So here, knight to f8 played from Carlsen, just delaying castling to see what Caruana does in this position. Also, after knight to d7, black's knight has some flexibility. It can go either to the king side or the queen side. So here, knight to e4 played, knight d7, bishop d3, developing the last piece. Black castles. So here, white can go knight f6 check and then win the bishop, but this shouldn't really worry Carlsen. After bishop takes f6, so you take with the bishop because the bishop has very nice potential along this diagonal with potentially moves like e4. So after bishop takes, and also you don't take with the knight because you give yourself the chance of playing knight to c5. So after bishop takes f5, g6, bishop back to d3, here black can play knight to c5. And if bishop c2, then here e4 opens up the position. White's king is still in the center, so this looks like a very promising position for black. Also opening up this bishop scope. So here, if after knight c5, let's say you take, then this isn't so good for white because after the recapture, let's say queen to c3 to pin this pawn, simply bishop g7, renewing the threat of e4. And this looks very promising for black. So after castles from black, in this position, rook h2 was played by Caruana. Seems like a strange move, but the idea is to bring the rook to c2, which would give more protection to the white king, because Fabiano Caruana is probably intending to castle queenside. So this makes castling queenside less dangerous, where white could respond to a move like b5 with rook to c2. So after rook to h2, rook a c8 was played, very logical move, putting the rook on an open file. White castles, so here b5 can be met with a rook to c2. So Carlsen plays bishop back to g6, so removing any possible tactics of knight to f6. Also preparing to play the move f5. So here rook to c2 played, f5 now from Carlsen, which makes it difficult for white to push to g4. There are also tactics in the air for Carlsen, and after the knight retreats, knight to f2, black knight hops in, knight to c5. So there are some tactics in the air here with knight takes, for example, maybe f4. So it is interesting to note that here after the move f5, white could go knight g5, threatening to go knight to e6. But this doesn't really work out for white. After bishop takes, if bishop takes g5, now the bishop no longer controls the square, so the knight jumps in, and there are some tactics immediately with knight takes and f4. So here if this h takes g5, then the tactics work out in black's favor. Here e4. After bishop to e2, then you can plant the knight on c5. So immediately moves like knight to d3 are threatened. So if you take the knight, then after d takes, queen b3, here you can play the move e3, which unleashes an attack on the rook. And if rook to c3, then queen takes g3. So here black isn't really worried about rook takes e3, because after queen takes g5, this puts the rook in a very awkward pin. So there's no king to b1 from white because the bishop controls the square. This is very awkward for white, excuse me. So here if white tries to push the pawn, then simply rook d8, preparing to take. So rook to e3 again is met by queen takes g5. So after the move f5, Caruana didn't play knight g5, instead knight back to f2, knight to c5 was played. So here in this position, Caruana played f4, which is understandable, just trying to lock out the bishop on g6. So let me just illustrate the dangers in this position. For example, let's say queen to a3, just for illustration purposes. Knight takes, and then here black can play f4. So you can't take with the knight, because then bishop takes c2, then here queen takes c4 is crushing. So here if you take with the bishop, then black also has bishop takes d3, followed by rook takes f4. So here if bishop to d4, then black can go pawn hunting and play bishop takes h4. So here if rook to g1, it seems like white has counterplay on the g file, but this can always be met with bishop to g3, closing up the file. And this h-pawn looks like it's going to run down the board. So here f4 is a very understandable move by Caruana. Carlsen could play in this position the move e takes f4. So just to open up the diagonal for the bishop coming to f6. If bishop takes f4, then here b5 looks very dangerous for white, with moves like bishop f6 coming. Also ideas like knight to a4 and a5 from black. So here this, if you play c takes b5, this loses immediately to knight takes d3, and then taking on c2. So after this b5 move, black's position already looks very promising. But here after f4, Carlsen plays a5, going for a very solid position with very little risk. So the queen drops back to d2, and now e4 from Carlsen. So now that the center and the king side is locked down, Magnus can shift his attention to the queen side to attack the king. So here bishop to e8 was played, a very logical move since the bishop wasn't doing much. So now black can play g6 to stabilize everything on the king side. Also this bishop could come to a4. King b1, bishop to f6, here rook to e1, so here white is pretty cramped. a4 played from Carlsen. So Magnus could have played here bishop to a4, forcing the rook back. Then just g6 to keep everything intact. Also g6 allows queen coming to g7 to put more pressure on the b2 pawn. And white is very cramped in this position. The only visible plan that I can see for white is to play something like knight h3, trying to bring the knight here. Well, there's not much going on for white in this position. He doesn't really want to take here take the knight on c5, because after the recapture, then this gives black possibilities of playing the move e3. So bishop a4 is a very interesting move to consider, but Carlsen played a4. So here queen to b4, making it difficult for black to go b5. g6 played, so just keeping everything stabilized. Rook to d1, perhaps trying to neutralize the pressure with bishop to d4, trading pieces. So here Carlsen played rook to a8, maybe trying to push a3, and bizarrely he offered a draw in this position, which Caruana gladly accepted. Perhaps Magnus feels confident in his ability to win the tiebreaks, so maybe he didn't want to risk too much in this game, despite having a slightly better position. So what do you think of his decision? Feel free to leave your comments in the comment section below. So tomorrow will be a rest day for the players. Then on the following day, the players will play 4 rapid games. If the match is still tight, then they are going to play 5 more blitz games. And if things are still tight, and then an Armageddon match will decide things. So once again, if you enjoyed my videos, feel free to like, share and subscribe. Thanks for watching and see you soon.